Good afternoon. Trust that you are well. Yes, so I wanted to talk about the issue of the budget. I have been asked to make comments with regard to the 2026 budget. However, when we look at the budget, every year the budget is presented, and then we have so many people who are negative about the budget. And I wanted to look at why that is so. So why do our successive budgets meet such negativity from stakeholders? Our perspective as New Heritage Party. So we wish to address the question of the annual national budget as it subsists currently, how it has evolved, and what it really ought to be, if it is to be relevant, impactful, and a strategic fiscal and economic tool in the developmental agenda of this country. So far, the majority of opinion on the 2026 national budget has been negative, and rightly so. But we need to understand why. So we feel that the failures that are being pointed out in the budget are more the result of structural and systemic failures as opposed to just the incompetence on the part of government. It's true that the UPND is a very incompetent administration. However, our technocrats at the Ministry of Finance are some of the most competent and capable experts in their field. However, they work under the direction of the politicians whose agendas may not align with what the country requires. This being the case, we have to look elsewhere for the faults in our national budget. So, evolution of the national budget. We need to understand where our budgeting process, where we have come from with this process of making budgets. So our budgeting model has transitioned from one that we had in a one-party state with a nationalized economy to one relating to a more open economic structure. So the way that budgets are done in a one-party state are different from the way they'll be done in a more liberal economy. So at that time, in the one-party state, the role of the budget in the economy included prescription of and setting market prices. So prices of everything was set and controlled. So there was a lot of control there. And so the operations of the state quangos and fiscal expenditure. So you'd find that the budget comprised issues of saying cooking oil moves from this amount to this amount, fuel moves from this amount to this amount, and so because of the price control. This was possible because the state owned and was therefore in charge of most of the economy. The budget was also deeply connected to national development programs, particularly 5-year plans initiated by the National Commission for Development Planning. Changes in the national planning. With the advent of the liberalized economy and the end of the centralized national planning, the current nominal planning shift of national planning functions from a dedicated ministry to being a function under the Ministry of Finance, under the MMD government, spelled doom for the importance of cross-cutting functions in national planning that involve various economic sectors and institutions. So we entered into an era where the current budgeting process started. Although the PF in government introduced a Ministry of National Planning, the current model of budgeting that does not adequately reflect the national plans was continued. It is worth noting that the UPND government did away with the Ministry of National Planning and has reverted to the MMD mode of operation. The current annual budgeting model is disconnected from a coordinated national development plan. The budget is best described as shooting in the dark, lacking clear direction and purpose. A national budget needs to speak to the national plan and should not be one that merely speaks to the income and expenditure by government in a fiscal year. The national budget must of necessity reflect the developmental aspirations of the nation. It also needs to connect the various fiscal cycles through its presentation. Thus, without doing an analysis of the performance of the previous year's budget, giving comparisons between the previous year's budget and actual performance, as well as the explanations of why variances between the two are significantly different, then the budgeting process is merely an academic exercise with our not holding ourselves to account. The major component of our budget is now predominantly debt servicing and emoluments. This means that development and economic growth are not our primary and desirable outcomes. The current Zambian budget under these conditions, even allowing for the most physically disciplined administration, which the UPND is not, certainly is not, cannot meet the genuine bread and butter needs, let alone the developmental needs of our people. Challenges and limitations. There is currently a clear lack of innovative strategies for balancing the budget beyond the traditional taxation methods. This lack of alternatives to the traditional method of raising funds for the government is one of the biggest problems facing the Treasury. The small formal sector that we have as a nation, comprised of mainly public service workers and a sprinkling of private sector taxpayers, is primarily responsible for the major part of tax contributions, thereby limiting revenue generation to adequately fund the budget. The effect of this is that the Zambian worker, especially the civil servants and ordinary citizens, are overtaxed and carry the burden on behalf of the large foreign corporates that are benefiting the most from our wealth, but are themselves enjoying tax holidays and reduced tax rates, contributing almost nothing to the national coffers. The current budgeting approach serves at best only as a stopgap measure rather than a proactive tool for development. We are merely treading water, and soon the whole false economic edifice will collapse under its own unsustainable weight, thereby risking economic stagnation. Conclusion. The national budget has undergone significant changes, evolving from being a tool of a government in a one-party state to a fragmented process that lacks coordination with national development goals that we now aspire to as a nation. The absence of a ministry dedicated to national planning is at the core of this malaise. Consequently, current practices of budgeting are insufficient as they are primarily focused on debt servicing and traditional taxation, which hampers economic growth and sustainability, and clearly not able to meet the daily bread and butter issues, let alone the developmental aspirations of our people. A shift towards a more integrated and innovating budgeting approach is essential, therefore, to avoid economic stagnation and ensure progress towards a more prosperous future. This calls for a budget that is part of a broader developmental agenda rather than merely being a resource allocation tool. For such bold but necessary steps to be taken will require a national concord and a serious legislative action to embed a long-term national planning framework within which the annual budget cycle will play its strategic fiscal role as a development delivery vehicle that we so urgently need as a country. You see, there are things that we sometimes take on board and begin to work with without thinking through about whether what we are doing is actually helping us to achieve what we want to achieve. So we begin to do things the way it's always been done. And because we continue to do things the way it has always been done, it means we keep getting the same results, which are suboptimal. So we must think about our nation, and we must think about what is required to be done in order for the country to move from this level to the next level. So the budgeting process, you know, we see that as soon as a budget is out, everybody says, oh, that was a bad budget, or this was whatever. But we must look at the underlying reasons, which is what it is that we were discussing. So thank you so much for listening. Until the next time, take care. Bye.